Hi, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, time to get started. I'm Nancy Langton, Associate Dean of Accreditation and Strategic Initiatives at the Lewis College of Business, Brad D. Smith Schools of Business at Marshall University. I'm excited to be with you today. Welcome to the HERD 2020 Insights Small Business Webinar Series. We thank you for taking the time to attend this event today. It's the third in a series of webinars given by the Lewis College of Business faculty and local business professionals. The series showcases the combined expertise of our best faculty and seasoned and knowledgeable practitioners from the business community in which we engage. The goal of this series is to help small businesses as they emerge from the COVID-19 crisis. Before we start the event today, I would like to introduce Avi Mukherjee, Dean of the Lewis College of Business, Brad D. Smith Schools of Business, who will say a few words about the college and its mission.
Welcome everyone to this exciting event. We appreciate your interest in this HERD 2020 Insights Small Business Webinar Series. The mission of the Lewis College of Business and its Brad D. Smith Schools of Business is to promote economic development in the regional community and beyond. We do this by implementing our strategic priorities for external engagement and economic development, including lifelong programs, the Business and Economics Research Symposium, the Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series, and the CEO panel that many of you attended last spring. The college also has outreach centers, including the Center for Entrepreneurship and Business Innovation, or the iCenter, that helps small businesses innovate with a focus on design thinking techniques, and the BB&T Center for Leadership that promotes consulting and research projects between students and the community. The college also cooperates with the Brad D. Smith Business Incubator to help promote entrepreneurship through the region. As the nation and the state start rebuilding businesses and economies coming out of the pandemic closures and lockdown, the Lewis College of Business is committed to supporting our local businesses, alumni, and other stakeholders in re-engaging, recharging, and redesigning their business models. Hence, we have developed this webinar series that will consist of presentations through the summer and into the fall every alternate week. We hope that you enjoy today's presentation and take something out of it for use in your business or professional activities to make West Virginia and the surrounding area a better place for business and community engagement. Nancy Langton will now introduce today's speakers.
Thanks, Avi. Today's informative and engaging presentation is titled Counterbalances and Counterstrategy, a Pandemic Pathway to Business Strategy Innovation. It is brought to you by Dr. Uyi Lawani and Dr. Letton. Uyi is a faculty member here at the College of Business and is a researcher and expert in business strategy. Alan has his own consulting company and is partner at the Lewis Institute and managing partner at Innovative Technology Consulting, LLC. He is on the college's advisory board for the management department. Uyi and Alan will discuss the unique opportunities COVID-19 presents for innovating business strategy. Please feel free to ask questions via the chat function throughout the presentation today. Uyi and Alan will answer these questions at the end of the presentation. I now turn it over to our presenters.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Langton, for the kind introductions. And to my boss, Dean Avi Mukherjee, I'm sure I speak for Alan and me when I say this. We appreciate the opportunity to share our thoughts on this topic today, and we are particularly grateful for providing such a platform. Like Nancy said, over the next several minutes, Alan and me will be sharing our thoughts and our insight on how businesses can create what we have termed counter strategies in the face of a pandemic that has counterbalanced the regular order, not just of doing business, but of life generally as we knew. But let me just say very quickly that when my department chair, Dr. Deepak Subedi, approached me and Alan to think of the most relevant issue for businesses from a strategic management perspective, considering the pandemic, we had no difficulty whatsoever in settling for this topic. And we think our instinct was proved right because Associate Dean Nancy was prompt in agreeing with us and in putting us on the schedule to discuss this. So here we are, Counterbalances and Counterstrategy, a pandemic pathway to business strategy innovation. So our plan is to share some nuggets with you that we hope will be useful as you position and maybe reposition your businesses both now and in the aftermath of the pandemic. But I'm going to focus a little more on the macro level of the topic. I'm going to look at the level of the impact of the variables in the external environment on the firm or the organization, and the struggle by the firm, therefore, to interact and hopefully dominate these variables. Alan's discussion will hone in on the more micro aspect of the topic, issues that border on what may become the newer forms and shapes of competitive and functional strategy. So permit me just a few seconds. I'd like to back up a bit and be a bit more specific about the term itself, about strategy. Now, I understand it's a word or a concept that most of us are familiar with, but that's where the problem lies. The word and its meaning have become trivialized because it belongs to anybody and it belongs to everybody. But strategy is not just a plan to do something or an arrangement of work, an arrangement of processes. It's a plan founded on and derived from a complete understanding of your resource position and the environments, both within and without the organization. So your strategy should lead you or lead the organization to sustainable profits. And so by its nature, it takes a long-term form. And so it must be antithetical, therefore, to think of strategy as a short-term proposition. So we hope that with this understanding, then, when we launch into this, we'll be able to relate that most of the suggestions and nuggets we have for you are not just short-term or interim, but they are hopefully the things you can work with and leverage on to get your organization to have some kind of sustainable advantage far into the future. And so back to the discussion then, counterbalances and counter-strategy, a pandemic pathway to business strategy innovation. But let me preface what I have to say on the specifics by sharing a quick anecdote. A little over 3 months ago, I think precisely on the 9th of April, at the time we're about 2 or 3 weeks into the lockdown in our state here in West Virginia. And the Navy was featured on our local TV station here in Huntington. And the discussion touched on the results of a survey conducted by the US Chamber of Commerce and Industry that have found that 54% of US businesses had closed at that time, that 24% of them would never recover. Now, here in West Virginia, 96% of our businesses are small scale. They employ about 50% of our workforce. So imagine the impact of losing just 15% of that. But perhaps the most profound remark in that news commentary was the Navy statement that the pandemic had given us cause, so giving us the time to pause, to reset, and to innovate. Let me say that again. A time to pause, a time to reset, and a time to innovate. And it surely is. For strategic management and organizational planning, it's a must. The pandemic has given us a reason to do that. And I think there are 3 relevant and interrelated questions to help us flesh out this notion and to hopefully make more sense of our discussion. The first one is this: why is the pandemic necessary for reimagining our approach to business strategy? Second, can the pandemic teach us anything about our approach to strategy? If so, what? And if the answer to the first part of the second question is yes, then a third question must necessarily arise. Is this approach sustainable, and does it engender what I defined about strategy a short while ago? Does it engender long-term benefits to the organization? But I'm going to use another example to attempt an answer to the first question. Is the pandemic, does it help us reimagine business strategy? Why? So in most places, or I've seen quite a substantial portion of literature since the pandemic started, characterizing the event itself as a black swan event. And it's a metaphor that describes an unexpected event. It has a major effect and is often inappropriately rationalized after the fact, with the benefit of hindsight. So it's based on an ancient saying that sort of presumed that black swans did not exist. And so it became reinterpreted to teach a different lesson after the first European actually came into contact with them. To bring some kind of understanding of this, Nassim Nicholas Taleb published this amazing book in 2007 titled The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. So he said in the book that, you see, this extreme impact of rare and unpredictable outlier events and our tendency as humans to find some kind of simple explanations for them retrospectively is exactly what it is. But the main assertion from his work on this is not for us not to attempt to make such predictions, but to find ways to build robustness to them. So Taleb emphasizes in the book that a black swan event really depends on the observer. So for example, what may be a black swan for a turkey is definitely not a black swan for the butcher. So the question then becomes, or the objective then becomes, I want to avoid being the turkey. And I have to do that by identifying areas of vulnerability so I can turn my black swan white. And this is exactly what any manager or business owner should realize. The pandemic is an outlier event, no doubt. But depending on how you view it, you can choose to be the butcher rather than the turkey. So the pandemic is necessary then for reimagining your approach to business strategy, because it forces you to factor the need for robustness to mitigate the impact of such upheavals by building shock absorbers around the organization. So we have seen from this experience that the cost of not doing so outstrips by far the cost of doing so. And our advice is this: do not resign to the fate of the turkey. Reimagine your resources and capabilities relative to the shocks and be sure to turn the black swan white. And so the second question, is there anything to learn from the pandemic that is applicable to our approach to strategy? Consider for one moment that the pandemic deals more tragically, at least that's what the experts say, with those who have vulnerabilities, with people who have underlying health conditions, what health professionals call comorbidities. In other words, the pandemic by itself could not kill, not as substantially as it has, without help from a pre-existing condition. And this is tragic, but it is not different or dissimilar from what has happened to many businesses in the economy. But because for those of us in this business, in practice, in the teaching, in the research of strategy, have somehow narrowly defined what underlying conditions are in business and in management, we fail to recognize glaring comorbidities specific to industry groups and to clusters of organizations until the economy shut down. And then, like typical of the Black Swan event, we retrospectively say, oh yeah, these businesses were sure to fail because they had these comorbidities. We failed to recognize them before the fact. And so businesses have collapsed, and we're seeing many other businesses push close to the brink. Every industry has its peculiarities. In our studies, in our research, in our practice of management going forward, we must seek to identify underlying conditions, no matter how inconsequential they may seem on the surface. Find them, deal with them if possible, mitigate their impact if not. And if these are not enough, harvest what you have and relocate to another industry. The aim of any organization is to survive in the long run. It's not to build a dinosaur. Now, for businesses that are local, regional, and even beyond, we've got experts here at the Lewis College of Business. We're always ready to partner with you. We've got folks with years of industry experience, years of research experience, and years of business management experience. So that if you're struggling to find ways to do this diagnosis, we have qualified and highly experienced experts to help in that regard. Do not help what seeks to kill your business to succeed. Starve it. And so this leads me then to the third question. Is this approach sustainable? Does it ensure long-term survival? Again, let me use what I call the pandemic paradox. So the COVID-19 virus supposedly has no antidote because viruses cannot be cured. That's what the experts tell us. You can treat the symptoms and just wait for your immune system to eventually fight off the pathogen. There's no cure from any medicine, but then it can be cured by antibodies within a healthy immune system. So the problem though is that antibodies are not readily available. They only also occur after the fact of an infection, or more importantly, by their introduction into the human body through vaccines. For long-term survival, businesses must begin to think prevention rather than cure. I must mention here again that every organization is different. Every industry is unique. Every industry is unique. And the measures to inoculate against shocks and the impact of black swans will be different from one business to the other. Extension from one industry group to another. So while you find airlines and aircraft builders, they have to find innovative ways to provide sterile cabins, safe air circulation systems, and assure onboarding passengers that their co-travelers are not health hazards. Banks and maybe other similar service providers will bring on board contactless interactions with their customers. So we're thinking drive-thrus, phone, online platforms exclusively. And so inoculation or inoculating may have upfront costs, but it is cheaper than the cure. So do not think only about the end product and minimize the process of getting that end. The process actually in itself is an end. That's the thing that provides the antibodies that help you immunize the organization against deadly infections. Think prevention, think process, always, always. So what I've done, like I said, is to lay the macro or the general overview for the thing. Hopefully, when we get to the question and answer section, we'll elaborate a little more. But I'm going to hand it off now to Alan to take us from the forest into the trees, get into the nitty-gritty of competitive and functional. Alan.
Thank you, Uyi. Let's go ahead and go to that first slide. So you've seen kind of a more macro or view of things here. I want to do three things in the last few minutes we have here. The first thing is to kind of show you where all of the mid to small size businesses are and what are the challenges we face. After that, I want to set down a pathway by which you can start thinking about your strategy and moving forward. So I want to give you a set of tools, at least some concepts to work with. And then finally, I'll give you a real working example. It'll actually be from the Lewis Institute to show you how we kind of proceed with this. So let's kind of take a snapshot and see where we are. There are 6, major things associated with small, mid-sized businesses right now. So the first challenge, as you can see, is access to capital is one of the major ones. We all know that businesses are closing their doors and the future is uncertain, but one of the reasons it's uncertain because of the access to capital. Now, when you look at what that means, it means several things. So one of them is access to your own capital, right? So if you look at the bottom figure, it shows you what cash flow has been, and it's really looking at gross outcomes. Are you putting out more money than you're taking in? And you can see that almost 40% of all the businesses are putting out more than they're taking in. And then if you look at those who are breaking about even, and then those who don't know because they just haven't done the analysis, you have about 75% of all the small and mid-sized businesses are facing a capital challenge. You then go back and look at what your employee base is dealing with, and they have their own set of capital challenges. Basically, it echoes the same thing, that the money out is greater than what's coming in. And so we've got this challenge that's kind of driving all of us, and we'll talk about some ways to approach that. Let's go to the next slide. And then, the next pair of challenges, one of them is how do you adapt in the ongoing crisis? We all know that the crisis is, even if we were to cure it today, the impact on the economy and our operations has not changed. It won't change for a while. So that ongoing crisis will be there for a while. And what we step into will never look the same as what we left. And so that's one of the issues. And we see that businesses are starting to do the easy things, like turning to internet tools. We're going to talk about that in a little more sophisticated way. The other part is we have this unique balance here, unlike other economic crises, is where you have to worry about caring for the household simultaneously to caring about the business. So if you look at where owners and managers are and where employees are, and you look at their responsibilities in the household, they're running about the same, but the issue is that we all now have a dual crisis, one of looking at the home as well as looking at the business. Next slide. So that leads to the kind of the last two here, which are not only are the companies facing economic challenges here, but the employees themselves are facing the same things. Now in this chart, they've actually looked at supporting your business, whether you're a female manager versus male manager. And the question behind this is trying to explore, was there some type of imbalance because of caretakers at the home? And it turns out, in general, there's not much variance. You can see it in different areas, but for the most part, the crisis is the same for everybody. So it is, non-discriminatory in that sense. So given that, I want you to think about this concept. All good organizations, all good activities involve three components: people, systems, and tools. We're going to talk about how do we interrogate those areas to understand how you can rethink and actually strategize moving your businesses forward. So the first one, the people, of course, that are involved. So if we look at where do you start, the first thing you have to do is assess your current status. And that means look at your finances, look at your operations, do a skills inventory, critically evaluate where you are right now in the middle of the crisis. And then you want to start rethinking along certain areas. So the first one is along your supply chain. Right now, everybody's had some kind of disruption in their supply, whether you're a restaurant and you're trying to find a source of meat, or you're manufacturing and because of logistics issues, you can't get the supplies you need. You've got to start focusing your supply chain. And you want to ask, are there ways to mitigate your costs? Can you do something different? Can you do a joint venture with somebody? Can you enter a 5 or 6-year contract that spreads your cost off more evenly to help you mitigate your costs right now? Are there new options that you can explore? And if you change now because of what's been forced on you, how does that look in the future? There may be some benefits for doing what you're doing. Then you look at systems. So for the system side of it, are there new methods for delivering your service? This is where a lot of people have turned to the internet. Are there new product distribution channels? So maybe you were doing everything by shipping to a OEM. Maybe you can do direct to consumer with certain products if you join a joint venture with someone. Are there new services you can provide? Are there internal operations changes that you can make? Meaning, can you change your workflow to reduce your costs and increase your to decrease your time to delivery? And maybe there's a way to look at your customer base or even your supplier vendor base. Is there a way to do some integration that will help you as well? So those are the questions you want to ask. And along with people, you want to ask, are there new skills that they can acquire? We'll talk about that a little bit more here. Can you consolidate some roles to get some efficiencies that you couldn't because you couldn't stop the operation to figure that out? Are there new hires you need to think about? We tend to always think about layoffs in times like this, but it may be worthwhile to think about new hires as well from an investment perspective. You should always be managing your costs with an investment opportunity if it's there as well. And do you shift your customer focus? We'll go to this next slide. I give you a very simple example of shifting the customer focus. So JetIt is based out of Greensboro, North Carolina. It's a private jet service. And for the longest time, they focused on a very unique client base. During this time of COVID, where people still wanted to try to conduct business, but they were afraid to go on to commercial aircraft, they started finding out that if they shift their customer base to small business and small organizations and to executives that even though investors and venture startups and so forth, they could start coming up with new ways to attract that new client base. And they thought about things like bundling service or pricing packages that would make it more attractive to them. They actually have had more business during the COVID-19 crisis than they had prior to this. And so this is going to be a long-term customer shift for them. So where do you start? So the first thing you want to do is work with your key customers, representative customer groups, basically focus groups. You want to try to identify what their pain points are and find out what's not working for them in this crisis right now. Ask them, what do they miss from you? You know, if you're a restaurant, they miss that wonderful hamburger you made, right? Or what do you wish you had from us? So what is it that we don't give you that you really could use right now? The idea behind this is to try to identify that new customer or that new product or service opportunity. Then you say, work with your suppliers and find out, and you ask this question, how do we work better to minimize our costs, to be able to manage the logistic challenges we have right now? And then you ask, are there systems or tools we should think about adopting? If you're working with Costco right now, one of the things they do is they want vendor visibility, which means you should be able to look into the Costco. They have a special vendor website where you can see where they're short on supplies for your product, and you can manage your shipment and logistics based on what you see in their inventory. It eliminates a lot of metal work and time and allows them to be more efficient as they work with their suppliers. Then you want to look internally. You want to ask yourself, is the strategy that you had the company beforehand, is it appropriate for now or moving forward? And in most cases, it is not. And then you want to think about what is a new business model for the short term, and maybe think about what does it look like in the long term and develop a transition plan. And in general, is your business model around growth? Is it around just sustaining right now? It is around new products and new markets. But challenge yourself to rethink that business model, because what you were doing before is definitely not appropriate for now. Then you want to see, are there new tools that you need to learn? Are there new ways of doing business? Are there new skills that people can acquire? And is there an opportunity for partnerships or joint ventures? These are the kind of questions you want to walk yourself through. Let's go to the next slide. So let me give you a real example that we've lived through recently. We've been working with companies, but I think it's better if we tell you ourselves. So the Lewis Institute has been around 40 years. It was based on the ability to train project managers to receive PMI international certification and licensing. We had a 95% success rate in doing so, and so that's been our bread and butter business. Most of our business has been based with North Carolina State University Office of Professional Development. Last year, we came out with a new business strategy that was going to focus on several things. We have been a Fortune 500 focus. We wanted to focus on mid and small size companies because that was where the real opportunity was. And to the point that we have bundled a service package that we were launching as a business consortium in March of this year. We started focusing more on technical management, product development, training, consulting, and management, because there was a real need for that as the world became more and more technically based. We decided to expand our delivery systems, so we were going to virtual classrooms, simulcast classrooms, as well as creating new online content. And so we were looking at new delivery technologies. We were going to expand our academic partnerships beyond NC State. And then we're going to bring on new instructors to help us with this growth in the company. Then the pandemic hit, and like so many of us, we actually lost 100% of our business. As universities closed, as companies retrenched because they weren't sure what they wanted to do with spending, we were in a situation that many of you all find yourself in. So we did exactly what I showed you in that other chart, and we went through, and here's where we ended up. So on the people side, we decided to focus only on our current instructor base. We would train instructors to be proficient in the new virtual platforms, and we developed new partnerships. So for example, we're negotiating and talking to other learning management systems, corporate systems who do compliance work, ethics, things of that nature. We're trying to see if they can represent our platforms in their training base. We decided to move to more public domain because in the current environment, training in the public area has become more and more important. And we wanted to incorporate a more social focus where we bring in senior executives together in a fellows program, which is a web-based system. And we started working on community coaching and leadership. For our systems part, we decided to push our current content development. So from content that we were going to do anyway, it doesn't cost us anything. We had to come up with new contract negotiations with NC State. Used to be if a class didn't have 10 people in it, we didn't offer it. Now we moved that so that we can go to a revenue stream. It's not perfect, but we renegotiated the contract for the profit share, and that allowed us to operate even in the minimal of conditions. We decided to launch some of the new content as a beta course. We focused on web content since we have built this infrastructure, and we stopped all in-house programs and stopped trying to advertise for those because no company was operating. It didn't make sense to do that. And for our tool side, we ended up, all of our Zoom Pro, Webinar Jam, all the media stuff that we needed, we went on and brought in-house and signed those contracts. Those of us who were critical in this, like for myself, we upgraded all of our home offices to studios. You all can't see it, but I got boom mics everywhere, multiple cameras that point at whiteboards and studio lighting and all that in my office. It scares my kids, but that's all right. And then we moved to different digital marketing, and we're going to launch our business consortium. We redesigned that business model so it launches as a digital platform. So you can see there's a number, just by following that, we've been able to make that change. Is it making us profitable? No, to be quite honest, but it stabilizes. So going from 100% loss of our business to now having business that allows us to stay at break even, so it stopped all of our bleeding and it allows us to move forward in a more aggressive way without having to worry about being so financially disadvantaged. So let's move to the next slide. I want to leave this slide before we go into the Q&A here. The process that I showed you is really a small, reduced version of the balanced scorecard. If some of you are familiar with that or not, it's a very nice process for making sure anything you go after, whether it's financial or customer driven, gets balanced in the organization against strategies and allows you to come up with the right lead indicators so you can track in a more sophisticated way to make sure you're doing the right types of things. I mention this because one of the things I would encourage everybody to do is, although this may seem like a bit of work, it really isn't, and even if it was, it's worth it, is you want to think about, if I come up with some financial objectives, I've got to make sure they balance across our customers and across our learning and growth internally, which is those internal systems and learning, and then those internal workflows. And you got to make sure all of this balances. I'd leave you with this only because I would say, start off with the kind of roadmap that I gave you at the beginning there, but you really want to come in and do a more structured view. And it starts with the financial analysis, understanding what aspects of your operation are costly, which ones are not, which ones could be potentially profitable, and how you design around that. So with that, we'll stop and let us go on to Q&A, if you will, at that point. So Nancy, are you going to facilitate questions here? Or?
Yes, I am. Thank you and Uyi for an enthusiastic, informative, and insightful presentation today. It will help us all think more about our strategies as we come out of the COVID-19 crisis. I'll now read some of the questions that were posted during the event and some that arrived by email before the event. The first question here is, most small businesses are already under immense financial pressures because of the pandemic. How does a struggling business implement these strategic steps in the face of dwindling resources?
So I'll address that because that's exactly what we faced. And we've helped other organizations do that as well. And to do this kind of focused analysis that we talked about here is actually an in-depth 2-day process. So it doesn't become very costly. And you can sit back and do the analysis, do all your financial evaluations, and start brainstorming some of these options. So you do that first. That's a very low cost. Then the second part is where you start to look at, and this is where we went, you look at joint ventures, you look at cost reduction with your vendors and so forth, those are no cost discussions, but they can allow you to get to a point where you can start to generate some internal cash flow and manage it that way. So that's our recommendation for doing it. I would tell you, for those of you who may be thinking about this question, we did try to go with the COVID Care small business loans, and I've worked with other groups who have tried to do that. And unfortunately, we have had, and they have had, 100% failure rate because, unfortunately, you've all read this in the news, the bankers who were driving this were going with their long-term relationships over those of critical need. And they were using evaluation criteria that did not favor those who had critical needs. The hospitality industry was hit very hard by this. My daughter is a chef, and I've watched what they've gone through in the same environment. So that money wasn't available. So I think you have to think about, how do we internally generate more cash flow and profitability, and then use that to kind of drive things moving forward. It's not an easy answer, but it was the best one that everybody's been able to utilize.
So let me just kind of piggyback off what Alan said, and go back to the to the first nugget we talked about. And so it's an effective thing. If it wasn't the pandemic, it could have been any other challenge or any other shock. The truth is, as tragic as it is, the first default of someone who wants to survive in the long run is to think about the opportunities, or to translate the problem into a leverage for something different. So that, but at the end of the day, everybody needs help. We're not minimizing that. But the first help, the first point of call for help is from within the organization. In other words, the business itself. So you have to change the mindset. So are you a turkey or are you the butcher? So this problem has come. We have any resource or resourcefulness within. Can we rearrange or reimagine our capabilities and find ways to pull resources from out of thin air, if that's what you have to do? But you've got to leverage the problem to become an opportunity. And then it completely transforms your outlook to the problem and to the solutions, or the set of solutions for which.
Okay, thanks for the answer to that question. This one is for Alan. Did you focus on the challenge of creating and sustaining business relationships in a mostly virtual environment? If so, what tools and approaches did you use?
Well, so the answer to that is yes, and because maintaining those current relationships, we had to redefine all of them. That was the big key here. So we ended up doing, I guess, the tools we use to do that. So obviously we're using Zoom or some other media, digital media, for all of our meeting platforms and everything else. We tend to go with what the organization was using. So I've got a manufacturing, FDA manufacturing company I work with out of Maryland. They like Microsoft Teams. So we worked with Teams in their format. But we found out that document sharing and the ability to work collaboratively varied from platform to platform. So we moved to Dropbox for all of our digital document. And for interactive sharing, we used Microsoft Teams. Worked well for Microsoft Office products, so you can work on them collaboratively. And so, but we ended up using Zoom a lot because we could set up breakout rooms, and we could take different teams and have strategy meetings like you would live. So if we've got the senior staff and some of their direct reports working, we could break them up into digital conference rooms where they can go work on assignments and come back. So we're finding out Zoom was the best one for working with people. And I should say Zoom Pro. Everybody hears Zoom, but we actually have the Zoom Pro contract so that we can facilitate meetings and things of that nature.
Okay, the next question from the audience is, I am in advertising, TV and digital. How can I best serve my small and medium-sized businesses? What is your experience with the digital advertising you did?
I love that question. I would tell you that the one that most of the small and mid-sized companies can't do is find the direct client base or potential client base to go after. So having a targeted email list, right? Everybody who uses any of these digital email tracking systems, out of GoDaddy or any of the other ones, the problem is you don't know how to zero in that contact base for the profile you need. In advertising, you all know when you do your the scoping of the work, part of that is identifying the client base, all the demographics and things of that nature that are appropriate for the business that you're going after. Most small and mid-sized companies don't know how to do that. If you can offer that for them, even if you do it as a service that doesn't have a price tag for it, to help them identify their client base and then take a percentage on the back end, so you can tell I've been doing this a lot, that is a tremendous impact, because most folks don't know how to go out and do that, and they don't know the digital platforms. So if you're going to, you can help them not just set up a nice web page, but if they can understand how to integrate a digital payment system with that at their targeted audience, the whole idea of buying keywords with Google and making sure you show up in the searches, that whole digital world is alien to most people, but it's definitely alien to the small businesses. If you can help them understand how to use that to change their business model, that would be a tremendous impact to them.
Actually, I worked in advertising many years ago in North Carolina. When I did, we didn't even have digital. We did TV, radio, we did print. Digital advertising was barely just taking off. And the truth is that if you're in advertising, you want to stay as relevant as possible with cutting edge tools and platforms for advertising. But I think the one suggestion or advice anybody can give, especially if you're really wanting to help small and medium-sized businesses, is to understand that we're all in this together, and that as much help as possible as you can give, as much support as you can provide, considering that most of these businesses are struggling, I think we'll go a long way in helping them. But even more importantly is that we actually have a larger critical mass of people linking up to media these days. I mean, for want of information or for just the need to find ways to connect virtually. So it's actually a very good time. It's about rife for people to connect, for small businesses to get exposed on multiple platforms, because there are many more people tuning into digital platforms now than we did before the pandemic.
Okay, great. Thank you both. There's another question from the audience. It is, much of my work is with nonprofits and their boards, and in-person retreats are a big part of what I do. Any advice on doing these virtually? You sort of have answered this a little, but any other insights for this nonprofit arena?
Yeah, so just to add more detail to my earlier question. Answer. So I would go with Zoom Pro. The ability to have breakout rooms makes all the difference. And so with a Zoom Pro account, you can do that with you have to be a little more structured in your meeting. And so that way people know what the outcomes are and so forth. Also with Zoom Pro, I would advise that you have a couple of people who can help you facilitate the meeting. So when we do a big seminar, we did one on training communities to have difficult conversations around race and so forth. I think I know who sent this question. Send me an email and I'll send you the link to that. But it talks in detail about how you do that. It would apply for boards as well. So you've got to be able to structure the meeting, have key facilitators that can help with each breakout room, and then use the breakout rooms from Zoom Pro that will do that. The West Virginia Community Hub does that very well. They're not-for-profit, and their monthly meetings are structured the same way. So you could reach out to them for some input as well.
And there's another important aspect to conducting stuff virtually, or moving platforms from live or face-to-face to virtual systems. And that's that it's easy if you have the tool as the service provider. In this case, you're wanting to organize these retreats, to see it from your point that, okay, I've found this technology, I can deploy this. But then the user or your clients or your customers, because you're forcing them to change their mindset or to change what's been ordinarily their nature of relating or doing things, there's the aspect of having to prepare, educate, goad them, or encourage them. In other words, there's a learning curve or a transition curve for people moving from one way of life to another. And that's the whole idea, that we have to understand even the things we do now or the things we're used to doing before the pandemic weren't always that way. So we've had shocks and transformation and change all across the history of mankind. So if this is another such inflection point, then so be it. But you've got to take time to educate and to encourage and to patiently go people to transform or to change their style or whatever they were used to doing, and then seamlessly move into virtual world or virtual systems of relating where they were previously used to face-to-face or in-person retreats. But yes, that's the aspect of understanding and working from the user or the client point of view versus you as the service provider or the owner of the technology and deploying it for use for something like this.
Okay.
Okay, great. Were you going to say something else, Alan?
No.
Okay, all right. We've got another question on the board. It says, as a CPA in private practice, I have found Jim Collins' Good to Great one of the most important studies on business. It seems to be as important today as it was in 2001 when it was first published. Do you use this in any of your programs? If now is the time, to reevaluate your business, this is an excellent publication to read.
So I'm taking that was targeted to me, and the answer is yes, because that is a great book. One of the new content courses we've talked about is targeted at that audience, which is management and executive leadership in small, mid-sized businesses. I was hired by Larry Bossidy at Allied Signal. I came in as a director. This was some time back. But, Larry required all of us in the senior management roles to have a minimum of 60 to 80 hours of training every year. And some of that was at his direction. So this book, Good to Great, also, Covey's work, there were a number of pieces that we had to study and had to set up plans to put those into our work. So we created a new content course that gets launched in September, if I remember correctly. And we're going to do it both as online as well as a virtual class, and it's called Execution. So it's based on all these principles of Larry Bossidy, which also includes this Good to Great. So Good to Great is more on that front end and helping you bring in the business analytics and understanding your business. Larry Bossidy's approach to execution and strategy is on the back end, and so that's the course. So absolutely, we're putting it in. It launches in September, and if you want to send people our way, I will not turn them down. So
I think the question is actually even more relevant, or relevant in a few other ways. So that there are tools and programs available. In other words, we are not completely unfamiliar with experiencing shock or getting to or having to deal with these stumbles or upheavals in the economy or in doing business. So the truth is that it is a good time to reevaluate. It's a good time to reimagine. But when people struggle with the initial shock or the initial confrontation with the problem or with the issue, there's a tendency to fall back or to back away and then hope that some kind of solution happens in spite of you. Sometimes, yes, it happens. Sometimes, most times it doesn't. the solution is usually found when everybody realizes they've got roles to play in finding solutions. So instead of backing away in the face of the problem, you're actually learning. So yes, it's a good book to have, but it's more than ample time for evaluation or reimagining your business, right? So Alan mentioned, for example, the whole idea of forming joint ventures as a way to acquire resources or skills or knowledge or something into the organization. That's just one way. You know, if you don't want to go joint ventures because of the complication or the legal implication and so on and so forth, you form an alliance. If you're if you have so much resources at your disposal, you can do an acquisition. Matter of fact, we're waiting for the pandemic to end. I mean, those of us on the research side or the academic side of this whole thing, to go back and dig through the data and see if the pandemic has inspired or spurred industry consolidations or maybe completely annihilated some industries. We want to collect data and check. Because the truth is, it's the best time to do that. You've been wanting to, you've always had this low-hanging fruit. I want to change this system. I want to change this process. You know, you've collected data for your quality control and assurance for weeks or months or years. Now is the time to actually implement. Now is the time for incremental change. Now is the time for drastic change. Whatever it is you've been working on, to present the opportunity. Like Dinavi said, pause, reset, innovate. It's the best time to do it. If you don't do it now, I don't know when else such an opportunity will come. You know, now is the time. If you're wanting to buy this small business or consolidate in your industry, now is the time. I mean, if you want to buy, you know, there are three scenarios under which people will sell. You know, you're selling at book value, market value, or I'm discounting to the present value of future cash flows. Any one of those three, you'll find a good deal as we speak. So yes, Good to Great is a good book, but the question speaks to a larger issue of whether now is the time for you to do so many amazing, wonderful things that will help your business survive for a long, long time. And the answer to that question is yes.
Great. Thank you both for those answers. We have another question. It's sort of related. It says, is it reasonable to say that the pandemic accelerated certain trends that were previously happening? For example, telehealth, working remotely, virtual meetings, digital marketing, vendor and customer integration. Those were all trends previously which have been accelerated. Small businesses and less progressive entities seem to be at a disadvantage getting thrown into this.
So the short answer is yes and no. And let me explain that. You know, so part of technology management, we look at what's called the diffusion of technology into the marketplace and when you get to the tipping point and so forth. And so you have what are called the early adopters, and these are the organizations, if you will, that actually went after these efforts for a different purpose. Meaning, for example, it really was driven by new business models. So telemedicine, I worked with a company out of Canada that was doing telemedicine in Canada. You know, they were looking at that as a cost savings effort. It started off with them looking in the veterinarian space where the average, you know, in West Canada, they have these huge herds of cattle, anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 heads per herd, and they would only have 3 vets. And they had accepted a morbidity rate and you know, due to sickness of 15 to 20% as part of their operational costs, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of, to have that kind of a loss. But you know, they realized that if they went to telemedicine, where they can be more distributed in their servicing, both in the human space as well as the animal space, I use the animal as an example, you know, it saves them a lot of money and their profit goes up. So a lot of these early technology adoptions, digital platforms, were driven by a financial motive for all the right reasons. That's how technology moves into the marketplace. What has happened in this crisis is those platforms became the only platforms available to do business. So if you're a retail store and you don't have a digital presence, you got one real quick so you can make sure you were there. And so that leads to the second part of your statement. All of the small and non-progressive businesses who didn't have that integrated into their profit planning are now at a disadvantage because they don't have the expertise, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the digital bandwidth, they don't know how to sell and price in the digital marketplace. By the way, back to the marketing company, this is a great way to help them figure out digital pricing. But all of that is what's forcing people on. So now they're coming on for a different motive, and they're not being able to plan knowledge, infrastructure, and systems. So it's a yes and no to that, but that's why.
So I was going to say that the necessity has always been a mother of invention, right? So you don't realize sometimes how crucial some kind of activity will be to your operations until it becomes necessary to deploy it. So yes, has the pandemic accelerated certain trends? Absolutely, it will, for good and for bad. We also had to transform when the economy closed down. We had to transform very rapidly from teaching face to face to using online platforms. So we deployed the resources we had available, and since then we've complemented or expanded the options we have. But it's the way it is. The question is, if you choose not to adapt, then you're going to fall off. You're going to get acquired, or you're going to get consumed, or you're going to cease to exist. So yes, that's the yes part. Just emphasizing the yes part. The pandemic has accelerated certain trends for good and for bad. Hopefully, for businesses around here and for folks who are listening to us, we're hoping that whatever transformation, whatever adoptions or adaptations you had to make would lead you to be staying profitable and surviving for a longer period than the pandemic lasts.
All right. Thanks for all your answers to the audience questions. This wraps it up for our third HERD 2020 Insight Small Business webinar. We want to announce our next webinar that will be in 2 weeks on August 10th. It is titled Navigating COVID-19 Workplace Concerns, Keeping Employees Safe and Paid. It will be presented by our faculty member, Casey Baker, and business professional, Tom Norton. Look for your registration mail to arrive shortly. Please share this email invite with anyone you know who might benefit from these events. We appreciate all your participation in today's event and our speakers, Uyi Lawani and Letton. And always remember, we are Marshall.